Please let me welcome our first guest keynote speaker, representative for California's 19th District in the United States House of Representatives, is Congressman Zoe Lofgren. Zoe has been a Democratic member of the United States House of Representatives since 1995. That means next year is your 20th anniversary. Congratulations for that. She's a lifelong Bay Area resident, holding positions on the House Judiciary Committee, House Science, Space and Technology Committee, and Committee on House Administration, as well as, we all know, being a staunch advocate for digital rights. She's been recognized by many of her constituents for numerous awards in immigration, healthcare, technology, and women's issues, but she will tell you much more about this than me. Please welcome onto the stage Congresswoman Lofgren.
That's all right. That's all right. Well, good morning. It's great to be here with you. And if I need it, I don't have a PowerPoint. You know, I was mentioning I grew up about 3.5, 4 miles from where we are at this moment. And I've had a chance to see the valley completely change and become really Silicon Valley from what used to be an agricultural area. And there are many reasons why that happened, I think. There's a rich stew of reasons, if you will, starting with, I think, Stanford University. And the way Stanford not only produced brilliant scientists and technologists and engineers, but the way they interfaced with the commercial world, which I think goes back to Dean Terman at the School of Engineering, so that here in Silicon Valley, collaboration between academics and the commercial world is a cause for celebration, unlike other parts of the United States and even the world, where it is a cause for anxiety about corruption. Innovation was also spurred by Stanford University, and part of the stew of Silicon Valley is really smart people being here and having the opportunity to explore, and part of that, the ability to succeed, is the acceptance of failure. You know, in some parts of the world, if you fail in a venture, it is a cause for shame. Here it's a learning experience, and you have an opportunity to fail and start again, to be a serial entrepreneur. I also think that the focus that we've had on education and science funding has played a key role in the development of Silicon Valley. But I was asked, actually, to talk about just 3 of the issues that relate to the growth of Silicon Valley this morning, because not everything that's happened, and certainly probably most of the things that have happened in the Valley, were not caused by government, but government has had a role in helping to create an environment that will allow people to flourish. And so, you know, the question is, how can we remain innovative and competitive around the United States? And I think there are some issues that the federal government will deal with that will very much impact that issue. The 3 I want to talk about are immigration, intellectual property, and freedom online, including the NSA. Now, the role of immigration in the Valley is profound, and I'm sure many of you know that from your firsthand experience, either as an immigrant or working with immigrants. In fact, about half of the people who live in Silicon Valley were born in another country. And how we deal with that fact actually why we work so well here. I mean, in some parts of the United States, if half the people who lived in your county were born in another place, people would be anxious. Here, for the most part, people celebrate that. Even people who have been here for a very long time. It makes for a more interesting place. It makes for a more vibrant place. And I do think if you take a look at Silicon Valley itself, in the United States, about 25% of all engineering and technology startups were founded by immigrants, but in Silicon Valley, it's 52% of the startups were founded by immigrants. In the United States, Fortune 500 companies, immigrants or their children counted more than 40% of the Fortune 500, and these companies employ more than 10 million people worldwide. They generate $4.2 trillion in revenues annually, more than the GDP of every country in the world except the United States, China, and Japan. And that companies only survive if they can acquire the best talent that they can. You know, I often go to graduations, and I was recently at the Stanford University graduation, and I saw the graduating class in the School of Engineering, and I thought to myself, what kind of wealth is going to be created by that group of PhD recipients? More than half of those PhD recipients were foreign students, and a huge number of them wanted to stay and become Americans. And it seemed to me, I mean, if you take a look at universities all across the United States, somewhere between 50% and 2/3 of the PhD recipients in so-called STEM fields, science and engineering, are foreign students, and a huge percentage of them would like to stay and become Americans. At the same time, it's not just the tech world that has valued and prospered from immigration. Take agriculture, for example. We have an agricultural industry in California. It's in trouble right now because of the drought. But in terms of our bottom line in California, ag has almost as much to do with profit as tech. And yet, for legal immigration into the United States, there are just 5,000 visas a year for people who do not have a college diploma where we need them. So you can see that this has not worked out. Years ago, as many of you I'm sure know, the House of Representatives and Senate is organized along party lines. I am a Democrat, and right now the Republicans are the majority in the House, but in 2008 I had the opportunity to chair the Immigration Subcommittee, and I invited the then head of the Southern Baptists, who had not previously opined on the positive role of immigration. I always quote him because I thought it was such a great line. His testimony was that for many years we had two signs at the southern border. One sign said no trespassing, the other sign said help wanted. And we have had a number of people who have responded to the need in the restaurant industry, in the hotel industry, in the ag industry. The only way, honestly, those individuals could come and take employment was without documentation, and we now have some 10 to 11 million people in that category. So the question is, what are we going to do about the role of immigration? We have innovators who want to start companies that we're forcing to leave. We have people who we need to work in our fields that we cannot get from point A to point B in terms of legalization. And we have had this debate in Washington for a number of years of how to reform the immigration law. And as a former immigration attorney many years ago, someone who used to teach immigration law at the University of Santa Clara, and someone who has both chaired the Immigration Subcommittee and been the ranking member, the system is really broken from every which way. People don't realize it till they run into it personally, whether you're trying to get your spouse in from another country, or whether you're trying to get a key employee, or whether you're trying to get your crops picked. The system does not work. We have, sometimes people tell me, why can't you just get along in Washington? It's often a good question, but the truth is that the members of the House and Senate, in a rough manner, represent the people who send them there, their constituents. And the country has, in fact, historically been somewhat divided on the issue of immigration. That is starting to change. If you take a look at public opinion polls, you see large majorities on both sides of the political fence, Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, everything in between, that the current system is not workable and should be fixed. I think there's a growing recognition that you cannot round up 11 million people and deport them. Not only is it impossible to do, but the kind of police state that would be necessary to accomplish that would not be something that we would embrace as a society. And so there really needs to be some way to allow people who are in an undocumented status to get right with the law. I mention that not because it's the major technology issue, but the inability to do that has been a stumbling block to do everything else that needs to be done in the immigration system. I was part of a bipartisan group that worked for 4.5 years, actually, in secret, because the Republicans would have been terribly damaged had their participation been known, to see if we could reach a conclusion on the challenge of reforming immigration law. And there's a piece of good news. We actually worked through all the tough issues. We wrote a tremendously positive technology piece that focused on legal permanent residence rather than temporary visas, that provided expansive immigration for people who want to become Americans, who've gotten their education in STEM fields here. We figured out a way for people to transition into legal status from undocumented status, a way to make sure that the agricultural sector's needs were met in a way that was dignified in the future. That's the good news. The bad news is that our Republican members, or some of them, who really stuck their necks out and who I respect very much, even though we don't agree on everything, really didn't get the support they needed from their leadership and had to withdraw from the process. So that is a bill that's been drafted. The Republicans, as you know, lost the presidential election. The interesting factor for them to contemplate is that among Latino voters, they got less than 30% of the vote. The interesting factor is that they did worse among Asian American voters than they did among Latino voters. And the perception is that unless they get right with this issue, they're going to have a tough time in the presidential election, and the pundits indicate that they will not have another Republican president. And although the House members run by districts, and my Republican colleagues oftentimes have entirely white districts that are not agitating in favor of immigration reform, they do have an interest in having a member of their party at least have a shot at becoming president of the United States. So there is an effort underway by some in the Republican side in the House to do an immigration reform bill. And I talk to Republicans every day on this when we're in session. I know that there are Republicans who have a genuine interest that want to do a rational reform effort, and I want to work with them. Their problem is that they are very divided. There is a section of the Republicans in the House that really want to eliminate all immigration. They will publicly say that. And so they have a tough time in moving forward. In the House, we have 201 Democratic members of the 435. We're 17 short of a majority. I would say of the 201, we might lose 1 or 2 on an immigration reform bill. On the Republican side, it's not at all clear that they can get a majority of their majority to move forward. So state of play is the Senate has passed a bill. It's not a perfect bill, but at least it is a reform bill that got broad bipartisan support. The Speaker of the House, Mr. Boehner, has indicated that that is not on the table for a vote. And so we are scrambling to try and put together something that will actually solve this issue for the benefit of America. When I go back, I hope that they will be releasing their so-called principles, and we will have some idea of the direction that they're going, and I hope that we'll be able to work through the challenges and come up with a solution for the United States. But having the innovators that immigration helps provide for our country isn't enough. We also, after we've got the best and brightest innovators and scientists in the world, we need to make sure that the innovation itself receives the protection necessary. All of us have become aware of something called patent trolls. I don't yet usually use that word. It's patent assertion entities who have used the patent system basically to shake down innovators. And there isn't a day or a week that I come home that I don't talk to not just the big companies, because the big companies honestly can take care of themselves. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of lawyers, but it's the startups that are really getting killed on this. And here's kind of the way it goes. You've got a patent or a multiplicity of patents in the tech side. Somebody gives you a demand letter asserting that you have infringed. And because patent litigation is so awesomely expensive, I mean, the discovery will cost you a fortune. You've got to lawyer up. It's going to be years in this. You could spend millions of dollars to defend yourself on a case that is essentially frivolous. So these patent assertion entity will say, we're going to sue you, or you can pay us an amount less that it will cost you to defend. And so even though you might say you ought to stand and fight, if you're a startup, you can't afford to do that. And so I really think of it as a shakedown of companies and especially startups, and it really is a danger. And what's happened, we actually did a pretty good bipartisan bill in the House. This has been a problem for years in the Valley. It's something that, you know, I've been concerned about, but it wasn't until the patent assertion entities really overreached that we got the political weight to move forward in the House. I think it was the lawsuits against the coffee shops who had Wi-Fi hotspots in the Midwest, and all of a sudden these coffee shops and small business owners and little tiny motels are saying, you know, what's a patent and why are these people trying to extort money from me? And members of Congress who didn't know a patent from a potato chip were all of a sudden saying, we've got to do something about this. Now, the goal was to protect against these abuses without destroying a system that's important, because inventors also need to be able to protect their invention, and the patent system does provide for that. I'll run through what we did, and I'm not going to say it's a perfect bill, but it's a step forward and it's the first step. The Innovation Act, it first creates transparency in the process by heightening the pleading standards. In order to bring a case, you actually have to specify which patent was infringed, where the claim resides in the infringing instrument, and to put, the defendant on notice as to what is really happening, but also to require the plaintiff to have a real case, which would be a change for some of these assertion entities. We did something that's controversial, but not actually unprecedented, which is to provide for fee shifting in frivolous cases. Loser pay is an issue that is, you may or may not be aware of. It's a very controversial issue in civil litigation overall. But basically it says if you lose the case, the loser has to pay the attorney's fees of the prevailing party. That can actually be adverse for legitimate cases, because some cases are brought on contingent fee, and if you are a small part, not everybody who loses a case is wrong. Juries are human, they can make decisions, and so what you want to do is to make sure that valid cases can be brought, but that abusive cases are deterred. And so what we did was to provide that unless there was, we would have fee shifting unless there was actually an arguable claim to be brought forward, so that the judge would have to make some determinations. We limited discovery to core issues at the initial stage, because discovery can really drive up the cost of litigation. And the fact that discovery costs would be lower at the beginning would, we think, be a disincentive to the ability of patent assertion entities to do the shakedown. And we also allowed for a stay against customers when the manufacturer is involved and wants to step into the shoes of the person. And you can just think about this. You're the coffee shop in Missouri. you got sued because you have a Wi-Fi hotspot, it may be that the maker of the equipment that allows for the Wi-Fi hotspot that's allegedly infringed wants to step in to your shoes and protect its product, because if there's an infringement, you're not going to sell very much of that equipment. Now, we passed the bill 325 to 91. And, it was rocky because, Democrats and Republicans don't always get along. I took the lead on the Democratic side, and part of what made that possible was to listen to people who had concerns, because even now this bill is not a perfect bill, and to try and make it better and to work together. What a concept, huh? And so the bill is passed. It's over on the Senate side and in their hands, but we will see what happens next. We have hopes that at least some of the major elements of the reform may survive. But even if that survives, we have other threats that are facing us. One of the things that I spent a lot of time on is internet freedom. I think many of you were aware of SOPA a couple of years ago. I was the senior Democrat on the Judiciary Committee that fought against that. I wrote the 103 amendments to stop it. I was the one that required the reading of the amendment for an hour to delay it so that we would have time to organize. And it was really very satisfying to stop that in its tracks. But that's not the only threat that we have to a free internet. I have watched with some concern the increasing revelations about the NSA. One of the things that drives me wild is, and I'm not going to talk about anything that's classified, I can't and I shouldn't, but these guys from the NSA or Justice Department will say, well, we fully briefed the Congress. Not so, not so. We had a classified briefing in the Judiciary Committee just before the reauthorization in 2008. I attend all the briefings I can, and that was it. They just came in, did a briefing, I won't go into what they said, in order to get the vote that they wanted to reauthorize the act. I voted against it, but there was really they were not forthcoming until Mr. Snowden actually did his leak. Now, people are arguing, and I think properly so, whether clearly it violated the law. What he did violated the law. But I also know that we would not be aware, not only in the country, but in the Congress, of some of the items that had been leaked, except for that leak. Now, there is a major bill that I'm a co-sponsor in called the USA Freedom Act. Jim Sensenbrenner, I don't think Jim would mind me saying he's kind of a curmudgeon. He relishes that role. He's a very smart guy. I mean, obviously, he's a conservative man, and we don't agree on everything, but we work together on many things, and we're working together on this. He was the author of the Patriot Act, and in the renewal of the act, he put in a word that he felt, and I voted against the act, but I felt, everybody felt, that the introduction of the word relevant was a limitation on what the NSA could collect. Instead, they apparently took that as an expansion, inexplicably. And Mr. Sensenbrenner is very unhappy with what has happened and has taken the lead in this reform bill. The bill would end the bulk collection of American records shared with third parties and would put limits on the Patriot Act powers targeted at U.S. persons. It would amend the act from the 2000 Act to require court orders before the government could use the American information collected during foreign intelligence operations. It would, and this is something that I did a separate bill on, and Jim just incorporated it into his bill. It would allow companies to disclose what they've been asked to provide. Without going into details, if you don't know, you can imagine the worst. And some of the companies that have suffered economically because of this situation would like to say, how many times have they been asked for information, in the sense that it would be reassuring. It also would create a public advocate. You know, the FISA court meets in secret. The whole system of American jurisprudence relies on pro and con. There's a prosecutor and there's a defender. There's a plaintiff and a defendant. But the FISA court is just one side that the judges hear. And so this would put in somebody to argue the other side. It would also, under current law, provide for the extension of Section 215 of the Patriot Act with these reforms. So that's an important point, because Section 215 of the Patriot Act provides the legal basis for the collection of this data. It expires next year. And Jim Sensenbrenner has said, and many of us have said, either this is reformed or we're going to let that section expire. And I think that we have the votes to do that in the House. It's a broad bipartisan coalition of very conservative Republicans and not very conservative Democrats who are working together to try and bring this about. But it's not, the Patriot Act isn't the only concern. I've got a whole host of bills to make sure that the Privacy Act of Americans, privacy rights of Americans are protected against the state. For example, the Electronic Privacy Communication Act, it was written in 1986. I wasn't in the Congress then, but what were they thinking? Provides that if you have stored email or other electronic communications that's been stored for more than 180 days, law enforcement can get that with a subpoena. They don't need a warrant. They don't need any probable cause. They can just get it. I think it's bizarre to think that spam has protection, but my email that I cherish from my daughter that I saved in a file has none. So we have a bill to reform the Electronic Privacy Communication Act, also to protect not just email, but geolocation data. Now, why is that important? You know, we live in a global environment, and as Fujitsu would know, and many of you know, whether you're Google, whether you're Cisco, whether you're on and on and on, your market is the world. And if the Europeans believe that by selecting your product, their customers are less secure, it's not a great marketing tool. And there has been studies indicating we're going to have $1 gazillion in losses. I don't know what the truth is. I do know that the competitors of American companies are using this as a marketing device. I don't blame them. I guess we would do the same. But we need to clean up our act, not only to protect the privacy rights of Americans, but also to protect the economic engine that is Silicon Valley and the United States. Now, I think that one of the things that characterizes Silicon Valley and really America, and it's part of what immigrants bring to our country, is a sense of optimism, a sense that you can change your future. I think about my grandfather came here. He was 16 years old. He had nothing. He didn't have any luggage. He came to the United States because he thought he would get rich, and he thought that it would be fun and he would be free, and I'm so glad he did. Here, I'm his granddaughter, I'm in Congress trying to make that same thing happen. That spirit of entrepreneurial, whether you're a poor 16-year-old trying to make a better life, or whether you just got your PhD in computer science and you think you can change the world for technology. It's about optimism and feeling that we can make a difference. So I bring that sense of the Valley to Washington every week. Sometimes it's discouraging, but I actually do think that we can make progress on these issues, especially with an aroused public. And finally, and I want to give a little time, I don't know how much time we have, but 5 minutes or so to questions. The phenomena of SOPA, not yet replicated, entices me as an opportunity and perhaps a model for change. SOPA, I have a long fight going back many years on copyright overreach. I'm not against copyright. I think authors have a right to protect their material, but you've got this overreach on what my friend Senator Ron Wyden calls big content that is heedless as to the effect on technology. And it's kind of a lonely fight, honestly. On the House Judiciary Committee, there are many times when I'm the only no vote. I can't get people to work with me. But when SOPA came, it was, I mean, the atom bomb of overreach. And I remember I went out and I gave a brown bag report to a group of people at Mozilla in downtown Mountain View, saying, you know, you guys better wake up. And I ran through what was coming at them. And people, frankly, couldn't believe it. They said, how could people be so stupid to do that? Well, believe me, they are. And as it went on, you know, the conference calls that we had, the late Aaron Schwartz, what a tragedy that he died just a little over a year ago. But he and other people his age that organized. And finally, you know, I said, this is going to pass unless the American people melt the phone lines down in the House of Representatives. And in fact, that's what happened. And I'll never forget the morning that the blackout came. As I said to one of my friends, SOPA was inevitable until it became unthinkable. And it happened in like a 2-hour period. And I went onto the floor and people said, what the heck's, they didn't say heck, what the heck is going on? And people just, it was toxic. And I think you can't use that kind of organizing for every item, but there are certain things where an aroused public needs to speak out. And we need to be aware of some of the backdoorism. I've got a very careful eye on TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement. WikiLeaks leaked some things. It looks like there's some SOPA-like material in there. We need to make sure that a free internet that is not balkanized, that is not owned by governments that want to control it, that is not threatened by government agents who are destroying encryption instead of helping us make a more robust and reliable internet. Those are things that we really need to stand up for. And I know that if we stand together, we can make a change and we can have the kind of bright future that not only we deserve, but our children deserve. So with that, thank you for letting me visit with you this morning, and I appreciate it very much. Sure, how much time do we have?
Well, 5 minutes,
okay.
No problem at all.
Sure. So we got 5 minutes. If people have questions, I'll be happy to try and answer. If I don't know, I'll tell you that too. Yes, sir.
Hi, Michael Shea from UC Berkeley. I have a question here. It's related to immigrants bringing a sense of optimism. On the same line, I can imagine that one day there should be a system set up for the patent protection, because that's intellectual property, right? Because right now, it doesn't matter which nation you try to apply for patent, it takes a long time, right. It's a really a grueling process. However, with US passport, I could travel to most of the nations on this planet Earth with a certain short period of time, and without requiring a visa. Could we do similar thing for, I mean, if I got a US patent approved or granted, will automatically get some kind of a protection on, in some other nations for a short period of time, so that I won't get screwed over during that period of time. Would that be possible for US to initiate that kind of a campaign? I mean, it's kind of automatically enforcing that IP protection all over the world?
That's a good question. We don't have that yet, but I think that there are, the patent reform bill we did a couple of years ago, steps in the direction not of doing that, but of making it more possible. We did something I never thought was achievable, which was to go to the first to file system that matches what everybody else in the entire world does. We are, I'll be honest, I'm very concerned about what's going on at WIPO right now. I mean, that is a tool that should be utilized to bring transparency and comedy to the patent world. The director, I don't know him personally, but his activities have been bizarre in my judgment. I mean, he secretly sent computer equipment to Iran and North Korea. He's done a number of things that are just, I mean, I think he is doing tremendous damage to WIPO, which will, I think, impair our progress forward. But, you know, we live in a global world. We need to make the connections as fast as we can. On the other side, we've got people worried about that. You know, there's something in, you mentioned immigration, there's something called the visa waiver program. Maybe you've heard of it, where you don't have to go into a consulate and get a visa. You just come in, you've got your passport, you do your security screening at the airport, but it's less bureaucratic, it's a lot quicker. Americans get to go to Europe in that way. We've wanted to expand the visa waiver program because it just makes sense for people to move more easily. The countervailing thing is you have people saying, you know, terrorists will come into the United States. Honestly, the reviews that are done in the 30-second interviews in the consulate abroad do not flush out the terrorists. It's the big data that we're going to still apply to people that are coming in. But there's a lot of fear about an international system, just as there is fear on travel. It's just a matter of working forward. Who else? Yes?
Recently, last week, there was a circuit court ruling that is to pave the way for net neutrality to end because the telecommunication companies were not ruled as common carriers, and thus those rules do not apply to them. Can you comment on what that might lead to and whether it will really lead to the end of net neutrality as it stands now?
That's a very good question. For
and
those
to answer that, how can we help?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's not a surprise, but the decision is not but, you know, it could be catastrophic if the FCC doesn't respond and recategorize telecommunications services at risk as common carriers. They should have done that to begin with for a variety of reasons. They didn't. I mean, I can't really go into what their personal views were, but core to technology innovation is that the pipes don't control the content, right? If you want to turn the internet into cable TV, great. I mean, they just, you know, did a blueprint for doing that. I think, unfortunately, the House of Representatives is not in the right place on net neutrality. I am. Congresswoman Anna Eshoo has been a leader on this in the Energy and Commerce Committee. Congressman Mike Honda has been terrific on this. I mean, the Valley people are fine. Really, the whole Bay Area is fine. But the telecoms will come in and say things that are so preposterous, and yet people believe them. That, you know, this is regulation of the internet. You got to be kidding me. But some people, the Republicans bought that, honestly. And so the last time we had a vote in the House, net neutrality lost. And we lost a few Democrats, but I mean, it was the Republicans that just killed us. And so I think we're going to have to, given that the Republicans are in the majority in the House, we're going to have to look to the FCC and the Obama administration to make this right. It's not going to be easy for them, but I think we need, you know, I don't know if anybody's done one of these We the People petitions to the White House. Might not be a bad idea. One of the things that the White House is committed to do is responding whenever there's 100,000 people sign up online. You know, if this decision stands, we got big problems, big problems. So I'm very much with you, and if you, you know, we're trying to encourage the FCC to move forward. I think the Obama administration, they are on our side. But how we get from here to there is going to be a trick. And I think activism on this point and education of people who think this is regulation when it really leads to the other result would be very helpful on your part. Yes, sir.
Regarding the immigration bill, regarding the immigration bill the Senate passed and, you know, just languishing in the House, you know, we all know that system is broken. It's a massive problem. But, you know, the way, you know, Congress wants to solve it, you know, solving this massive problem in one bill, you know, why can't we just address the important pieces that needs to be done, break the bill into several bills, and just pass the ones that needs to be passed, you know, no-brainers, and, you know, then, have all the extensive debates and discussions, so kind of, are you guys looking at that?
Well, let me, in fact, the Speaker has said they're not going to take up the Senate bill, they're going to do piece by piece. That's fine. I mean, if they want to vote on things title by title, I don't have a problem with that. I will say this, having been in the immigration wars now for a decade, what seems like a no-brainer to one group does not seem like a no-brainer to another. And that's why, although I was eager, let's do something for ag, let's do something for tech, let's do something for families, you can't get very far when somebody says, well, what about me? And, honestly, there are parts of the country, they don't know a patent from a potato chip. They don't care about what we're looking at in Silicon Valley, but they know they can't get people to pick their crops. They can't get people to pick their crops, and they're not planting because they can't identify a workforce. So that's the most important thing to them, not Silicon Valley. And then you've got the whole hospitality industry. And they don't care about ag, and they don't care about tech. They care about they can't get help to clean their hotel rooms or man the resorts. So this is more complicated. I've just learned it's more complicated than you might think. So part of what we're trying to do is to get the major elements done in a way that both parties can agree to. And I know it's possible to do that because we wrote a bill with Republicans that did it. The question is whether the Republicans are going to stand up to their Tea Party. That's just that honest. I mean, there's a group that they don't want anything. They don't want an additional immigrant. They want only temporary visas. Temporary visas are not the answer. I mean, I'll never forget a guy I met a number of years ago. He had been undergraduate at Harvard, and he got his PhD at Stanford. And then he did a practical training session, and then he was on an H-1B for 2 terms. By the time he was through with this H-1B, and of course they had an application for permanent residence, this kid, who was brilliant, had been here like almost 20 years. And he said, tell me, am I going to stay here? Or am I going to just go home? Should I buy a house? Should I get married? I mean, that's not competitive to keep people. I mean, there are some people maybe don't have options, will come to the U.S., but the people you really want, we're in competition for those people. And they can say, I'm going to Germany, I'm going to Britain. They don't have to stay here. And so to say that we're going to be successful by having temporary visa holders, that's just not going to work. And there are some on the Republican side that's their vision, that you have kind of wage slaves and who are just here as worker bees, and then when we're through with them, kick them out. That's not what we need in the United States. That's not what, if you take a look at what's made us successful as a country, it's people come and get to become Americans. Whether it's my grandfather, who had his naturalization certificate hung in the living room, or whether it's somebody who came last week but they wanted to start their company here. That's the genius of the United States, and we should not give up that success for a visionless future.
Congresswoman, thank you. We haven't got any more time.
No more time. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I'm so sorry for those of you, quite a few in the audience. I saw one guy with his hand up for what seemed like half an hour. Please spend a few minutes, come down and see the Congresswoman at the front if you can grab her before she rushes off. She mentioned patents to potato chips a couple of times, and that made me think I was hungry and needed a break. So let's go to a break right now.